Hi, I'm Dave, and what you're looking at is my wife's 1938 Pontiac. We've started the disassembly of this car, but while we were starting the disassembly, we found some really neat things about this car that are highly advanced. Something very unique about this car is that it's actually a second generation front suspension design by GM. You can see that there's a spring pocket underneath here that holds a spring, obviously. There's the bump stop. And these are unequal length A-arms, very much like modern suspension has in it. This is a kingpin suspension still. So a kingpin here for your steering. And then there's a cam in here for your adjustment. And this here is actually your shock, which is a very interesting and unique design that they used all the way up until 1957. These types of suspensions, there's not very much available for them anymore. I've heard of guys rebuilding the shocks for them. I'm not going to attempt it myself. The frame is a very rigid frame, however, I'm going to be fabricating my own frame for this as well. Another unique thing about this car, being that it's a Canadian car, is that Canadian Pontiacs actually got overhead valve engines. And I believe it was all the way up until 1957 that they still had flathead engines available for Pontiac cars. So this engine is a 216, and you can tell that this is a 216 because of the two center bolts on the valve covers. This is also a side cover. You can access your lifters and your push rods through it. Now these engines were splash in the bottom and they were pressurized up to the rocker arms in the top, which is kind of something a little bit unique that it shares with the Chevrolet counterparts at this time, whereas the American cars still got flatheads. Because of the design of the touring sedan, they needed to make a luggage area for the car, and underneath here is where the jack and spare tire and all the things that you would need for road maintenance go. And there's a stand built under here, and I'll show it after because I'm going to be removing this plywood. This plywood separated where the trunk is compared to the rest of the car, and one of the reasons why the trunk actually stuck out is so that they could have some trunk space. Otherwise there would be almost no trunk space in this car. So one of the interesting and unique features about this car is in modern cars, in the trunk, you have the tires are behind the back seat, and in this car you basically sit right over top of the back axle. And another thing that's interesting about this car, different from modern cars, is modern cars have what's called open driveline, which means that the axle is completely separated by a drive shaft, and in these cars the drive shaft and axle are one piece with basically a prop shaft going through it and a universal joint up at the front which goes into the back of the transmission, and then the axle is hung over the spring perches. And Chevrolet used this design up until 1954 on the GMs. I'm not sure what year they went to on the Pontiac. Something else that's interesting about this car is this little hole that's here. I'm not exactly sure what it's for, but I know it's riveted to the floor. If I step back, you can see that it's in the trunk space. Maybe somebody out there in YouTube land can tell me what that's all about. I've gone and pulled the linoleum covering off of the plywood that's in the back, and you can see there's 3 unique holes that are in the plywood, and I have reason to believe that this plywood is probably original. And underneath there's also some 2x4s that are shaped so that it fits into a bit of a contour. Once I get the plywood out, I'll show you what the contour looks like. And the inside of this is also shaped almost perfectly to the inside of the trunk itself. And there's the wood that I took out. I tried to take it out as good as I could without destroying it. There's the weird pockets, and you can see right there where the flathead screws are. This was all flathead screws, so some of it I had to try and drill the screws out. And there's the blocks of wood that I was talking about that holds it into place. And here's the stands that I was talking about. You can see it goes all the way around on the inside like that. And then back up at the front. And then back down the side. Being that this car is a Pontiac Silver Streak touring sedan, it's also a 4-door, and the back doors are suicide doors. That should pretty much wrap up what interesting features this car has. But for my wife and I, this car also has some interesting history. It was also used as a limousine at her grandma's wedding, which we didn't realize was the case. We found some chauffeur's licenses under the seat, and then at my wife's grandma's birthday, she was showing pictures from when she was married, and this exact car was in the background in the picture. She comes from a very small town, and there's no way it was any other car. If anybody knows what the threaded piece in the back of the car is, or even what the holes in the plywood are, let me know in the comments. And while you're there, like, subscribe, and follow my channel. Let's hang out in the garage.